Hi everyone. So welcome to our latest panel. This one's all about writing young adult speculative fiction, and I'm joined today by two of my friends, Meg Eden and Sara Crawford. And yeah, we're really excited to be talking about YA speculative fiction because this is something that all of us write, and it's just such a great genre. This is a live stream to YouTube, and we have got a live chat facility where you can ask any questions at any point during the video when we're talking live. So then we'll be able to see your questions pop up and we can answer them as well. So yeah, first we will start with introductions. So for those who don't know me, my name is Madeline Dyer and I write YA dystopian fiction. So I've got a 6-book series out called the Untamed series, and this is book 1 here. I always mess up when I try and hold my book up because I always forget where my webcam is and I'm just like holding it off center. But that's my book. So Meg, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Meg Eden. I teach creative writing. I write poetry and fiction. And my debut novel, Post High School Reality Quest, is speculative fiction about a girl who thinks she's in a video game.
Great. And Sara?
That's cool. My name is Sara Crawford. I write YA urban fantasy, and I have a time travel book coming out in August. But my main trilogy is the Muse Chronicles. There's 3 books in it, but this is the first one, We in the Sky. So, yeah.
I love your covers for the Muse Chronicles. Like, I remember when you first revealed them, like, it was quite a few years ago now, wasn't it? But, like, the covers just drew me in, like, immediately. So
thanks. My cover designer, she's really, really good. Caroline Johnson is her name.
Yeah, they're really attention grabbing. And Meg, I love your cover as well because it's just like I read a review copy of your book or something, I think, like just before it published, and I remember thinking like how well the cover actually fits your book because like it's just such an amazing story and like you never kind of know what's real and what isn't, and I really love that about your book. So
thank you.
Yeah, so firstly, shall we talk a bit about how we got started writing YA speculative fiction? So Sara, do you want to go first?
Sure. I got an MFA in playwriting. That was kind of my background, was in playwriting, but I always read YA and fantasy. Like I read both, YA and adult fantasy, sci-fi kind of stuff for a while. So yeah, I graduated with my MFA in 2012, and then of course, as soon as you get a degree in playwriting, you start writing fiction. So that's kind of, I don't know. I kind of just had always been a reader and a fan. So I just decided to give it a shot. I wrote actually the Muse Chronicles came out of a play that I wrote. And then, I just thought like, what if I took this idea of the muses and put them into fiction, and I could kind of get more like involved with this intricate world,
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, one of the things I really love about writing speculative fiction is how you can kind of make like almost anything happen. And it's just like there's so much possibility within the genre. Meg, how did you start writing a YA speculative fiction?
So I want to bounce off what Sara said because I too have a background in a different genre. So I studied poetry and got my MFA in poetry. And like Sara, as soon as I did that, I became more serious about fiction. I've been writing seriously since high school, and I've gone back and forth between fiction and poetry. I love both of them. I don't think I ever set out specifically to write speculative fiction or specifically YA. I think it's just what happens. I think we write what interests us, what we care about, and sometimes it's not necessarily what we expect. I don't know if I necessarily set out to write something specific. I just knew I wanted to write novels. And I think the what ifs are always what drive us as writers. Like Sara, you were talking about like what if the muses were in these stories and you could play with them on the page in a different way. And so I think similarly, I get really interested in like, what if I could go back and change something? So the game mechanics of being able to like respawn and save and that kind of thing were what drove it, and that ultimately ended up making it speculative, because you can't do that in real life, obviously. So
yeah, great. Yeah, like I just love like as I was saying, the sort of like freedom that speculative fiction offers. And yeah, like I can't really sort of like definitely say that I one day decided to sit down and like I was going to write speculative fiction. It just kind of like happened. And like, because I was like 17 or something when I started writing my first manuscript, which is a terrible manuscript, by the way, and it's never going to see like the light of day. But yeah, like at that age, I was just kind of like having fun writing it and just like writing about things that interested me and things that like I found entertaining. And it was only like a few years later when I sort of like became aware that speculative fiction was like this genre that like encompasses quite a lot of different things. And I just like really fell in love with it then and just started like reading more and more. And I knew that I just kept wanting to write that sort of fiction. And like YA especially, because like writing for teenagers, like it's such sort of like a formative time of their lives, and it's a time when like you can really speak to people as well, because like I know when I was a teenager, like I was looking for these books that really spoke to me, and like I was looking for characters that I could identify with and that were going through like similar struggles that I was, and then combining that with like speculative fiction where it's got like this whole extra element of escapism, I just find that really entertaining and really rewarding to write as well. So yeah, what is your favorite thing about writing this genre? And who wants to go first? I don't know whether I should keep like picking names. But...
well, I think what you just.
Oh no, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. This is the thing about digital platforms. I think what you said about having fun, I think is the most critical thing. And I think speculative, like you said, anything's possible, so you can have fun in a way where you aren't bound by the constraints of the real world.
Yeah.
And so I think that allows for, and it allows for refreshing takes on the real world. I have been working on one about a demon who's impersonating a man's long lost love. And so I can think about, things that I value, like I'm a Christian, so I think of my spirituality, but I can play with it in the speculative world. I don't have to take it literally. I can like think of concepts and kind of like make them my own and do interesting things with them. And so that freedom of play, I think, is what's most fun.
Yeah, I think the like YA goes really well with the speculative fiction, because you were saying like there's so many possibilities in fantasy stuff, like you can pretty much do anything. But then I think back to when I was a teenager, and it felt like the possibilities like for my own life were like endless. Like I didn't know what was going to happen. So I feel like that's it. They kind of go hand in hand. And when you're that age, it's like you're discovering who you are. And I think putting those kind of characters in situations where they have to discover like what the world is kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Like I know when I'm writing sort of like a new like draft, because like when I'm drafting a new project, I don't really do any planning at all. I just sort of like free write it all completely. And it means my first drafts are so messy, and I give myself so much extra work when I'm editing. But I find it really fun, partly because when I'm sort of like writing a new like speculative project, I'm very much sort of like paying attention to the way in which what I'm writing interacts with the real world, especially if like I'm creating like a dystopian society. And yeah, I just think that like it can teach you a lot about your own world, but in a way that's not like preachy as well. And I just think that is like it's really important, because like you can bring across a lot of social issues and like moral issues as well in like YA speculative fiction, and yet at the heart of it is also like entertainment as well. And I just think it's such a versatile genre in that way, and it's just really interesting to write and to read as well. Like I cannot like get enough of like reading this genre. Like my to be read list is just massively long, and I'm still like buying books when I haven't read other books that I've already got, and I'm just like I get so excited when I see a new book out. I'm just like, oh, I must read this, because yeah, it's just you kind of never know like in this genre like where a plot is going to go, because like there is just so much freedom and endless possibility. So Yeah, like I know one question that I always get asked is, where do you get your ideas from? And it's also one of the questions that I kind of hate quite a lot as well, because like it's never really a simple answer. So I'm going to ask you that question next, Meg. So where do you get your ideas from?
Everywhere. Yeah, I struggle with that question too, because I think my ideas are the things that stick with me, the things I'm like I can't stop thinking about, because I'll, write down a bunch of ideas and 90% of them never become anything, but it's ones that continue to ring to me, and I keep being reminded of in my daily life. So I'm not sure I have the best answer. I think for anybody that's an aspiring writer, maybe trying to get ideas, I think just having a notebook, having somewhere where you can write down things that stick to you when you're just in your daily life, anywhere and everywhere. I think that's where ideas come from. They come from our lives.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I love the idea of just having like a notebook just to like write down just like little bits that like might sort of like be really inspiring, but you never know exactly how they're going to interplay with each other. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Sara, what about you?
I don't know. I get a lot of inspiration from other art, like music in particular. I wouldn't say I get ideas really from music, but I always get like a tone or kind of like a feeling that I want to capture. And then I get a lot of ideas from just watching, movies, TV shows, reading other books. Especially like if something happens that I'm not the biggest fan of and that makes me like upset, and then I'll be like, well, I'm going to write my own story so I can end it like the way I want it to, like, I don't know. It's kind of childish, I guess.
That's a great motivation for writing though. So yeah. Oh, hi, Emily. I think we can see you now. Yep. Hi, Emily. Hi, I don't know if you can hear us, but
yeah, I don't know.
Can you hear us, Emily?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, can you hear
good.
us?
Oh my goodness. Sorry I'm late. I had a crazy time mix-up. I mixed up the UK time with the regular time, and then I was at a doctor's appointment and walked out and was like, oh my gosh. So I'm here now.
Oh, don't worry.
So if you see the back of my car, this is why, but better the back of my car than no me whatsoever. So So I was able to listen to a little bit of what you guys were saying. I was backstage for about 5 minutes before I came on, kind of listening. So I'm so excited. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, that's great. Do you want to just introduce yourself for like viewers? Because we've got a couple of people watching this live, so
you can just Madeline, I cannot hear you for whatever reason.
Oh, can you not? Meg, can you still hear me and Sara?
Let me see. Sara or Meg, can you say something? So okay, I can hear you, Sara. Meg, can you say something?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can only hear Sara. This is the weirdest thing.
Oh, okay. I'll just repeat everything.
Be the translator.
Now, Emily, do you want to like introduce yourself to the viewers?
Absolutely. So my name's Emily Colin, and previously I've written 2 adult novels, which is a lot of fun and which I love, but I have always adored YA lit. I read it kind of obsessively, and when I can, I buy hard copies of books. So like if you go to my house and you go like up the stairs at the landing, whoever owned the house before has like a built-in recessed bookshelf with like a real honest to God ladder that you can climb up, and it's just filled with my YA collection. I just love it. And so I moved into writing YA myself because I love to read it so much. And my adult books were with like a bigger press, but I'm really excited because my YA trilogy, which is called The 7 Sins, is coming out with a small press. And the first one, Sword of the 7 Sins, comes out in early August. So it's really crazy, as I'm sure you guys know, to be bringing out a book in the middle of a pandemic. It's just, it's different and it's wild. And I would love to hear from you all too about what you feel that's like, and how you've adjusted, your writing and your promotion and your creative efforts in these times, because it is so different. And I feel like I'm just trying to learn from everyone about how they're doing that, because I've never published a YA book before. I've never published with a small press before, and now there's COVID-19. So it's different, and it's a different world. But I'm so excited about this series, and it's about a world in which citizens must live and die by the ramifications of the 7 deadly sins, and of course, lust is punishable by death or exile. So naturally, my 2 main characters fall in love. So
of course,
it's fun.
Nice. Yeah, I have a book actually coming out in early August as well with the small press. So yeah, it'll definitely be interesting, like releasing a book during all of this. Yeah, and all of my books before that have been like indie published. So it's a new experience for me. Like actually having a publisher, and like, oh, I don't have to do everything myself. Like I don't have to hire my own editor and cover designer. Like, so that's been definitely interesting. But I think like the pandemic actually makes people more into the speculative fiction, because it's an escape, it gives them something else to think about. Although dystopian fiction is kind of becoming more realistic.
Yeah.
That's what my book is. It's sort of like it's dystopian romantic, but there's a speculative element in it as well. And so that's my fear too. It's like, I know I'm not like necessarily immersing myself in dystopian worlds right now, because I don't have to, because here we all are. But there is that fantasy element to it as well. And so I've been really like, I'm writing book 2 now, and I'm really like leaning hard into that, because I feel like the speculative element, that element that sort of lifts us up beyond where we are right now and allows us to imagine a different reality, is that escape that we all need. And maybe we would try to get it previously by traveling or going out to dinner with friends or having drinks with friends, but we can't do that. So we kind of need to escape in our own heads. So that's why I think speculative fiction is so valuable for all of us right now.
Well
said. Definitely. Yeah, like my 6th book released sort of like at the start of the pandemic. Oh yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
I don't understand. It's so weird. Okay.
But yeah, like my 6th book released the start of the pandemic, sort of like February. So it was before the lockdown and everything, like in the UK. But yeah, I'd been planning to do like this whole book tour in like March and April, and obviously those couldn't go ahead. So I had to sort of really switch all my marketing efforts and like promotions to like online things, like videos like this in a way. But yeah, it was quite a challenge. Just sort of like knowing how to sort of like market a book, because like it's the 6th one in my series. I had like a sort of like readership base anyway, so that did help. But yeah, it's definitely been very challenging, and yeah, it's quite fun in a way, like trying to sort of like find ways around it. But I've also found I've met so many new authors who like I hadn't really come across before, because everyone's now in the same position, and there's so many people trying to release books at this time. So yeah, like I found like the like writing community is really pulled together, and like there's this really strong sense of community because we're all in the same position. So.
Yeah, I found that too. I mean, I found that like it's the writing community is very supportive of each other, and like you think there might be like a sense of competition, but like I don't really feel that way, because we're all readers too. So like we all like, we're like, oh, I'm obsessed with your book, and I'm obsessed with your book, and like, oh, here's my book too. Like, so we're all just kind of supportive of each other. It's nice.
Definitely.
Sarah, can you repeat like, the gist of what Madeline said for me, just so I can know what we're responding to?
Yeah, she was talking about how she released a book in February, so it was kind of before, like right before the lockdown, and she was talking about how like discovering other writers, because we're kind of all like in this weird place trying to release books like during this weird time. That was probably not a good summation of what you just said, but That was that's my interpretation.
So I'm sorry to put you in the Oreo cookie role of being the interpreter. I'm trying to like read lips, but it's not going very well. Yeah, no, I definitely feel like this is a time for other writers to support each other and to be able to do whatever we can to lift up each other's messages. And especially now that we're not able to do physical events, I think it eliminates these barriers where we're like, oh, I would love to come to your event and support you, but I live 5 hours away, or I live across the ocean, or I live wherever I live. You know, I can't do it. And so I kind of feel like it's lovely to be able to support everyone kind of gets a level playing field in terms of the level of support that we can give. And I definitely think it's like a time that's for us to be able to lift up each other and support each other as much as possible.
Mm.
So yeah, we were talking about like where we get our ideas from. So Sarah, do you want to ask Emily that question?
About what? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. I mean,
where you get ideas from?
Do you want to ask?
Oh, where you get ideas from? Okay, so Emily, where do you get? We were talking about this question of where do you get your ideas from? Because it's a question that you probably get asked a lot as a writer. We all do. So where do you get your ideas from?
Well, it's kind of funny, like where I got my idea for this series that I'm working on right now, the YA Speculative series, is different from where I normally get my ideas. Like for my first book, I got my idea from reading a memoir that I randomly grabbed off the shelf of the library about mountain climbing, and then wondering what it would be like to be someone who got left behind when the person that you loved died of mountain climbing. If you were a writer and you were not attracted to climbing at all, but you fell in love with this person who had this extreme lifestyle, like what would that be like for you, and what would it be like to be left behind? So I mean, that was my first kind of a book. This was different. My dystopian romance I wrote because it was back in 2015 when Trump was first running for president, and then I thought, what if he wins? I bet he wins. And then I thought, what if he isn't really him, but he's sort of a front for like white supremacist groups? And this leads to the rise of white supremacy in this country, and this leads to riots, and that leads to increased global warming. And what if this really happens? That's what this book was inspired by. And I set, oddly, the seat of the resistance in a post-apocalyptic Minnesota, specifically in Minneapolis. So it's very strange because that, and then I thought, okay, well, I love speculative fiction, so I added in like a speculative twist to it that I can't say because it would give like too much away. But that's where that idea came from. It was sort of like trying to manage my fear of like, what if this is the future, and let me try it and work through this in like an envisioning sort of a way. But of course, it's very awkward because almost everything that I wrote about then promptly happens. So I feel like I should write something else with butterflies and like chocolate chip cookies and like ice mochachinos, because this one came a little bit too close to home for comfort. So, I feel like sometimes my ideas are like basically from what if questions, or it could be a line from a song that I'm listening to that like really, really moves me, or even like going somewhere and seeing a piece of artwork and like looking at like, I don't know, a little girl in a picture and on a swing, but like a storm's coming in behind her and being like, oh my gosh, what is really happening to her? So, and then sometimes weirdly, like I'll just like have a one-line writing prompt and like a whole crazy story will come from that. Like I had a story in a YA anthology and it just came from a prompt, and the prompt was like a playground at midnight. That was the whole prompt. And somehow this became this whole thing in my head with like this like evil fairy, but he wasn't really evil because he was doomed because of love and this whole thing. And I was like, when I finally finished it, I was like, where did this come from again? And I realized it was just that one line. So I feel like my brain is sort of always soaking up different sorts of places for ideas, and some have like legs and they really materialize into something viable, and some are more short story ideas, and some are more novel ideas, and some are like, okay, I'm just going to stash this away because one day this might be something, and it kind of percolates in my brain. So yeah, all different places for sure.
Yeah, like I definitely find that I get inspiration from a wide variety of places. And I was just thinking about the inspiration behind book 1 in my Untamed series, and that's one of the manuscripts where like I can definitely pinpoint where exactly the idea sort of like stemmed from, which is quite unusual for me because usually it's like an amalgamation of different things, and usually I can't really sort of like think of one specific thing, but with this book I can. So it was a music video that I saw, and there was just like this 5-second clip in the video where there was like this market and what looked like a human heart was being sold at the market, and I just ran with that and just thought like how interesting it was. And I began thinking about all like these sort of like emotions and like attributes that are associated with a human heart. So like I got into like emotions and stuff and just thought of like, well, what if someone could buy emotions at a market? So that's sort of like where the premise of my whole Untamed series came from, basically, because in that world we've got a dystopian society where people buy and sell artificial emotions and they become addicted to them, and it's like used as a weapon against other people, where like people are constantly trying to control what each other are feeling. So yeah, that's like where I definitely got the inspiration from for that book. But the later books in the series, I can't really sort of like specifically say like one thing that triggered it all in a way. So yeah, and then like with my current projects I'm working on, like I don't really know where I get the inspiration from, but I do keep like a little notebook, like Meg, you were saying, where you just sort of like jot things down that like might come in handy, and like what Emily was saying as well, because you don't know when something will like, when an idea will sort of like get its legs and you'll be able to like really go with it. So yeah, just sort of like keeping the inspiration bank full is quite a good idea, I think. Yeah, Emily, can you still not hear me? I guess that's a no then. I have no idea what's happening with all this. So yeah, should we talk about world building next? Because like obviously world building is quite important in speculative fiction, especially if we're writing in new worlds that we create. So Meg, would you like to go first?
Maybe somebody else should go first. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to say about world building. So.
Okay, Sara, do you want to sort of like go first and also explain to Emily what we're now going to be talking about?
Yeah. So we're talking about world building, Emily. Which is an interesting question for me because I typically write like urban fantasy, or I have a time travel book. So everything sort of takes place in the world that we're already in, but there's just like a fantasy element. So I don't feel like I really have to approach world building in the same way as like someone who's writing high fantasy or dystopian or like science, like total science fiction. Total science fiction. I don't know. But yeah, no, Emily, do you have a certain approach to world building?
It's funny because both of my adult books that I was telling you guys about, they both have a speculative part of them, but one of them has a ghost, and one of them has a time travel element, like you were talking about, Sara. And so, for the first one, there was really no world building that had to happen because it was just introducing that ghostly element. And honestly, for the rest of that book, which was centered around mountain climbing, and I'm so not a mountain climber. Like if I stand on a chair, I'm like, I'm so high off the ground. So, I had to do so much research in that part of it. So it was kind of wonderful for the ghost part to be able to be like, this can be whatever I want because it's speculative. So I could make this up. So for the second book, I had a time travel element. And again, that was sort of like whatever I wanted. I mean, I had read other time travel books, so I tried to be careful not to make my time travel device the same as theirs, like no standing stones or no TARDIS or no, whatever. But beyond that, I didn't feel like I had to do a lot. With this one, I felt like I had to do more because it's set in a post-apocalyptic version of the United States. So number one, I had to figure out, okay, what will have changed? Why will it have changed? Let me make this change consistent. What does the United States really look like now? And it's weird to kind of put all this stuff together and then some of it you won't even use. It won't ever appear on the page. You just need to know it in your own head to understand the world. And I'm a very visual person. And so, when part of my last book was set in Barbados and I had the privilege to travel to Barbados. And so I had pictures of the places that I was writing about, and I could like put them up on my writing board, and I could really look at them and immerse myself in them and be like, okay, this is it. But of course, if you're making it up, it's only in your head. So then I was like, how, if it's only in my head, how do I make this consistent the whole time? Like, I'm not a visual artist, unfortunately. I was like, should I find a friend of mine who's a visual artist and be like, please draw this for me? And then I never will mess it up. And then it's also like, Madeline and I were talking about this a little bit the other day with a project that she's working on, that she was like, oh my gosh, is it too much of an info dump in the first 3 chapters? And, you know, for me, I struggle with that too, because it's like, okay, you need to lay out the details of your world, but how do you do this in such a way that you're not like, and then there's nothing between this and this, and these are the bad guys, and these are the shapeshifters, and these are the, so I feel like that's something that I'm really trying to learn how to do consistently. And I've never written a series before either. So this is a whole new thing for me. Like, I'm working on the second draft of book 2 now in this YA series. And so then it's like, okay, you set up the world in the whole first book, but you know, you want someone to be able to pick up the second book in the series and at least understand it. So then how do you like, what are the salient points that you need to kind of like drop into there so people will get it without being like, if you read the first book, you're like, yeah, I know all this already. Oh my God, you're boring me to death. Stop saying it. So I think that it's definitely delicate, and it's a way bigger deal for people who write high fantasy or science fiction, for sure. But even with my little dystopian with speculative elements, I get so invested in the characters, and then I feel like sometimes the world building falls apart, and then my beta readers will be like, so why is this happening? Like, I really don't understand the logic. Like, why? I'm like, oh, I didn't explain that, did I? Do you really have to know that? Because I really want to know just if they fall in love. They're like, yeah, okay, yeah, but you've got this whole bigger thing going on in the background. So I'm still really learning that, and I'm trying to pay meticulous attention to detail. And I've really actually started to just like write down some details of the world so that I have it all in one document, so that I can kind of come back to it, like the stuff I mentioned in the first book or whatever, so I don't have inconsistencies and be like, oh yeah, that's not really possible. Whoops. So yeah, it's definitely a learning curve for me.
Yeah, like writing a series with world building, like, because I've got like a 6-book series out now, and yeah, just making sure that the world building was consistent across all 6 books was such a challenge, because like, as Emily's saying, like, you want people to be able to pick up like a second or third book and still know enough about the world to continue reading it, but you don't want to bore existing readers who already know the world. So I know one thing that I sort of like did to work around that in my Untamed series was introducing a new layer of the world building with each book, or looking at the existing world building that I'd already set out, but looking at it in a slightly different angle. So because like mine is dystopian, but it's also got like strong fantasy elements. So you've got like seers, you've got spirits, and they're very much an accepted part of the world that these people live in. So my book 2, because like book 1 had only sort of like briefly mentioned the spirits and seers, like although they were like very much accepted part of the world, it didn't really go into detail. So in my book 2, I focused the world building much more on like the mythology behind the spirits and what people believe about them and what a different group of people believe. So like it introduced a lot of new characters, and when you get all their world building sort of like feeding into sort of the overall sort of picture of the world. And like as the series progressed, I sort of like looked at the world building sort of like it got a lot bigger, so like you get a more global sense of it. And yeah, like the last book which released, book 6, that one I did change it slightly, because in the first 5 books you've got the enhanced ones who are the enemy, but in book 6 it's got like a civil war between the Untamed. So having a different enemy but set within the same world, I found that really helped me open up a lot of new things to do with the world building that I'd maybe just sort of like hinted at in books 1 and 2. And I guess when I wrote books 1 and 2 and like set up these little things, I didn't actually know that I'd come back to them. But obviously, like, to any readers who are like looking through it like really carefully, it's going to look like I planned it, so it's going to make me look a lot more clever than I actually was like when I was writing it. But yeah, I think sort of like always being aware of the world building and seeing if there is like an extra element that you can bring in a future book, but without it being too like contradictory to what you've already written, because you don't want it to suddenly seem to readers like you've changed your mind about one aspect and you suddenly want to introduce something else instead. So I think it's just like a sense of building up, and like I really sort of like the idea of it being in layers, where you can just like add a new layer and it changes everything that a reader might think they know, but it doesn't mean that everything that you've written before is wrong. So Yeah, Meg, do you want to say anything about world building now? Because like I know with your debut novel, I loved the world building in that, and how it's sort of like it read sort of like in a contemporary way as well, but like it was so good, like with the whole video game aspect sort of like built into the narrative, and I just love the way you did that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think like with world building, I don't know if I'm trying to think of anything I specifically did. I feel like world building matters for every genre because I also write a lot of contemporary. And with all of it, it's still keeping your facts straight. It's still, like you said, showing the complex layers of the world without telling. With hearing what you guys were saying, it occurred to me I've been rewatching Avatar: The Last Airbender, and the world building in that show is so spectacular. And one of the things I was talking to my husband about realizing with what it does so well is it gives you the information you need when you need it. So I think that made me realize for future world building, I want to like you guys were saying, having a place where I kind of info dump everything that I know about the world. But then as I'm editing and writing the novel, I'm going to think, what information does my reader need to know at this very moment for this part to make sense? And I'll give that info and then stagger it, because then that creates tension, because there's the questions, the things that pull us in and we want to learn more about. But then it also avoids what you guys were saying about the info dump and the fear of like, here's everything about this world. So I think that's made me think about how I convey the world. But yeah, I think world building is really just about making sure you understand what the world is, and that the rules are consistent. Because I think for world building, this is more in contemporary, but like I had inconsistent characters with one of my latest drafts, and I had an agent that kept telling me, these characters still don't make sense. And to me, that's still world building. That was me having like inconsistent rules about how my characters work and how they think. So yeah, I think it's just really important, however you track that, however, whatever questions you ask yourself of what the focus is, that remains consistent throughout your books.
Definitely, yeah, consistency is just like hugely important. And yeah, you're really right that like world building does apply to all genres really, because you've got to sort of like make the reader comfortable in sort of whichever world you're asking them to like spend several hours with you in. So you've got to like, they've got to feel as if they're on the same page with you, and that like you can't just suddenly like introduce a wildly like strange thing that would never have been expected really, because there are sort of like certain sort of structures you've got to sort of fall within, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm rambling now.
No, it makes me think, there's a lot of books I rage read because they break their own rules. Maybe they focus on a certain, like I was reading one that I really, really like, but I feel like it built a certain kind of argument. And then the third act, it just kind of focused on a completely different thing. And so while I admired a lot of things about the book, I felt like the focus was lacking. So I guess when I think of world building, I'm almost maybe thinking more about the focus and the argument of a book, whether that's in speculative or contemporary. And that should kind of direct what details are going in there. But yeah, like I think there's a lot of books where a character is inconsistent, or the argument of the novel kind of betrays what you think it was. And that throws us out as readers just as much as, thinking we're in one world. And actually that's happened too, where I thought I was in one world and then the novel was like, JK, we're in this world, but it wasn't in the surprising, interesting way. It was in a very jarring, like, wait, what, I feel betrayed as a reader kind of way. So I think that contract with the reader is a critical part of world building too, is that the reader kind of knows what they're getting into, and the book kind of establishes that genre and it fulfills that.
Yeah, definitely.
Sarah, is there anything else you would like to add on?
Well, yeah, I was thinking about it, and in my time travel book that's coming out in August, it's called Time After Time, and it's about a girl in the year 2015 who travels back to 1987, which I was 2 in 1987, so like I don't really remember what it was like. So I had to do a lot of research, and I mean, I guess that's kind of like world building. It's just that someone else has already established the world. I mean, a lot of someone else's, but yeah. So it is kind of a similar process, and I like what you were saying, Meg, about giving people information when they need it, because I think it would have been easy for me to be like, oh, in the 80s, this was popular and this was like but like the reader doesn't need to know all of that like at that moment. So yeah, maybe I need to reference this here for this scene to make sense. But yeah, so I think like writing historical fiction has its own sort of world building.
Absolutely.
I would totally agree with that. And my second book that I wrote was partially set in modern day Charleston and partially in Barbados, a couple centuries ago. And so that was a big challenge for me because, first of all, I wanted to represent that accurately. And secondly, part of it centered around a slave rebellion, and I wanted to make sure to honor that. And so when I traveled to Barbados, I met with people who were descended from slaves that had lived on the island and spoke with them about, like, would you be all right with me representing this? And, all of the discomfort around that to make sure that I did that appropriately. And then just trying to get the details right and trying, I ended up going to the historical museum and just going through all of these papers. And my friend and my son had come with me and they were out there kind of like frolicking in Barbados. And I was like, oh my gosh, I get to go to the Bridgetown Public Library and look at microfiche. I haven't seen microfiche in years and years and years. And it's interesting writing historical fiction. I don't know if this has ever happened to any of you, but like when you imagine a character and a person, and then you find someone in the record who so closely resembles that, you're like, wait a minute, it's sort of like this feeling that you sort of like reach through the page and reach through time and met that person. So, but it does feel like world building. I couldn't hear what you said, Meg, of course, because this is my situation, but I could hear the echo of it in Sarah's voice. And so, I would agree that there is definitely this element of world building when you're writing historical fiction, particularly like the 80s, like even like folks who weren't alive then, like there's been enough sort of cultural references to that. So like there might be things that like, I don't know, bands that you haven't heard of, or like weird little strange, like, Transformer toys and strawberry shortcake and like all this stuff that like, you're like, all right, well, if I didn't live through that, I might not know that. But the general sense has sort of bled through until today's culture with movies that have survived and things like that. For me, writing about Barbados centuries ago, I didn't know any of this, and I felt like a lot of my readers didn't either. So it was like kind of an issue of like how do I introduce this similar to world building without beating my readers over the head with it, where they're like, oh, I just want to get to the story. Like, how do you introduce those rich historical details, like what it looked like, what people ate, and I remember really being conscious of this when I wrote it, because in my first book, it was contemporary, so I didn't have to think about, okay, every detail, like, when you wake up in the morning, what kind of clothes would be available to put on, what material would the floor be made of, what would people eat for breakfast, like all of these details that you also think of when you're building a world, but that are very much the case of wanting to get right in historical fiction. So I would agree, there's definitely similarities for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also like Meg, as you were saying, and what Sarah was saying as well, knowing sort of like how to convey this information about your world to the reader in a way that is relevant. So yeah, because like Emily was actually just saying earlier, like I had been workshopping my new manuscript with her, which is a YA science fiction, and as I said earlier, I write such messy first drafts, because basically when I start writing a draft, I have no idea what the book is going to be about, no idea what I'm writing. It's not really till the end that I know sort of like the shape of a manuscript. So then when I'm editing, that is really when I start working on the world building and then incorporating it. So I end up with I typically end up just slotting all my world building into like the opening of the book. And then I just feel that like, oh, there's just so many like info dumps, and it's just like it's too heavy like at the start. So then my subsequent drafts are all about sort of like trying to sort of like integrate the world building naturally and to get it so it's not an info dump and you are getting the information at the correct point. But yeah, with my current manuscript, I was just like, I've done so many drafts on it. I've been working on it with like agents for so long. Like my agent wants to take it out on submission soon, but I still felt that like the opening of it just seemed to be like really heavy with the world building at the start, and there just seemed to be like a lot of telling. And because it's science fiction, there's like a lot of world building that you do need to know, and like with technology that you do need to know kind of like up front. otherwise I was just worried that like readers would get lost as they're reading. But yeah, I ended up with this first chapter that was about twice the length of all my other chapters, purely because it was like doing a lot of like explanation. So yeah, the other day I just like messaged Emily and I was like, please help me, I don't know what to take out. So but yeah, like we went through it and we sorted out like the paragraphs which were like really like info dumpy and which were like making us want to sort of like skip to the next bit, whether it was like more action or more on like characterization. But then at the same time I was like, well, I can't really remove these paragraphs completely, otherwise the end of this chapter won't make sense and it won't have as like a dramatic a punch to end on. So I was just like, I remember I highlighted like the paragraphs that I needed to sort of like cut down, and then I just spent like an hour rewriting those paragraphs, trying to get it like a shorter word count until I cut it in half, but whilst I was still like portraying the same amount of information. And I think like that was sort of like key to me, sort of just like working out a way to get the world building across, but in as concise a way as possible, and only saying like absolutely what is relevant. Because when I'm like planning out all my world building after I've written like this really messy first draft, I plan out so many different parts of it that will never actually make it into a book. But I just kind of get stuck sometimes knowing like which bits are the bits that only I need to know. So yeah, I find like swapping manuscripts with authors at that stage is just so helpful, just to get a second opinion, and to like if someone tells me, oh, you don't need to tell the reader this at this point because it's not relevant until like slightly later on. But like that's just so helpful, because like I just find as the writer of it myself, I'm just way too close to get sort of like this objective view on it. So yeah, like with my my writing process, I do think that if I sort of planned it all out a bit more first, and like before I actually started writing, I could save myself a lot of time and stress over it all, because like I do make it so much more difficult for myself. But yeah, what about you? Do you like plot, or do you just like pants the whole thing? So Meg?
So it's interesting because I've been like you. I pants, and my first draft, I have no idea what's going on, and I've kind of had to tweak my process, or at least for some projects, tweak my process. So I've had this horrible nightmare of a second book that I've written probably 20 times at this point. So done with it. And I was getting consistent feedback that things just weren't making sense, that characters were inconsistent, that the things about the plot didn't make sense. And no matter how many times I rewrote and re-envisioned it, it still wasn't working. So what I've been trying to do recently is, have you guys heard of the Save the Cat model?
Yeah, that's what I use. I can hear
Yes,
you now.
yeah.
Yay!
Yay!
Excellent.
Oh yay!
Is that your Save the Cat board behind you to the left?
Sorry?
Is that your Save the Cat board behind you in this?
Oh, no, that's actually my ideas board. I guess we were talking about ideas and where we get them. So when I'm between projects, I try and write down on sticky notes things that interest me, ideas that haunt me. And so I can revisit this and kind of see what common threads I'm seeing. But for Save the Cat, I've been using the beat sheet. And I've been, for rewriting this second book that's a nightmare, I just took time to write a really detailed synopsis and to work through the beat sheet and really plot it, because I have so many pieces at this point, and I really just need to be more strategic at that point. And I've been experimenting with doing Save the Cat on first draft, but I do struggle with it because I think it ruins some of the magic. I love the pantsing because I don't know what's going to happen. So like the reader, I'm excited, like what's going to happen? I'm invested. And if I know, it kind of kills it. So I have to carefully tread that balance, because I think the Save the Cat model and other plotting methods have been helpful for giving me some focus, where I can see some things like, okay, this is what really ultimately interests me. I've had to do a lot of psychoanalyzing to dig into my book to figure out, why do I really care about this? What am I really trying to say? So now that I think I know how to do that better, I do use that as a guiding light. But I still like some bit of mystery of not really knowing where it's going to go. I know what kind of things I'm probably going to talk about, but how it's going to happen, I still want to see that through pantsing, I think.
Yeah, I love
So
this.
Oh, I
sorry, do you
can
want to
hear
go?
you too, Madeline.
Oh, you can hear me. Oh, that's so great.
I'm so excited. Yay.
Yeah, I was just going to add on, because like...
Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, I used to save the cat book as well, but I only sort of like apply the beat sheet to my draft after I've got like my first draft done, because that's when I'm like having the most fun and learning what the story is and not worrying about the structure. Because like my second drafts is where I really sort of like reorganize everything and like actually work out the structure. Because often in my first drafts I don't really write it all in like the right order. But I was just thinking with the last manuscript I wrote, I didn't write it in chronological order. I just like wrote whichever scenes like fitted, like, because I tend to write like one subplot at a time, and then it's like when I'm working on a future draft, I'll then sort of like knit it all together and work out how exactly it fits together. And it's at that point when I'm really paying attention to structure that I then use the Save the Cat beat sheet, because that's just so helpful, and it just helps me be sure that I have got like all the necessary components in it at that point. So
yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I feel like for me, what I discover is like, because I get so driven by the characters and what happens between them, sometimes I'll write this thing that's like way too long, or like because I left to my own devices, I'm a total pantser. Then I'll realize that I'm figuring out what's happening in the story as I go. So like I'll write the same emotional arc, but it'll be at the grocery store or in the bathtub or whatever. I'm like, oh wait a minute, did I cover this already? So I feel like for me, I ended up getting the adapted version of Save the Cat, which is Save the Cat Writes a Novel, which is specifically, of course, everyone takes Save the Cat, like sort of interpolates it for novel writing, but this is great because like it's able to work for you. So I'm trying to remember who wrote it,
Jessica Brody.
But yeah, there you go. And so for me, I was like, you know what? When I have to write this book 2 in the series, I now I'm on a sort of a deadline for this, and I know that this is a weakness of mine, and I know that, you know, I've got to hold this to 80,000 words. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to try this. I'm just going to see if this works and what happens. If I hate it, then I don't have to do it. And so I got like a big board and like index cards and sort of divided it out. And I didn't use the board as much as I thought I would, which is weird because I'm such a visual person. But it really did help me kind of think through some of the plot issues before I got to them. And I think because this was a series and I had to sell it as a series, I'd already had to write synopses for books 1, 2, and 3. So in that way, it sort of wasn't spoiling what was going to happen, because I already had like a 1-page summary of it, basically. So it was more like, all right, in order for me to hit these major beats that I outlined in my synopsis, how am I going to do this? And I will say that it really helped me from doing what I normally do, which is like wander off on these tangents as I'm trying to figure out the story. But I totally understand, Meg, what you're saying about it taking the magic away, maybe, because for me, that was always sort of the fun of it, was like, what's going to happen next? And like discovering that, like you said, alongside the reader. And then if I knew beforehand, it felt a little bit like writing an essay or writing some sort of expository piece, the way I block something out with a thesis or something. But yeah, it's helpful. I am very curious to see what it would be like if I were using it from the bottom up, like the ground up, so to speak, like a brand new novel, as compared to like book 2 in the series that I already had a synopsis for. I don't know if it would feel better, like, okay, now I've got these main things, so I can like have the magic happen between it, or if it would feel confining. I don't know. So I'm kind of excited to find out.
Great.
yeah, Sarah, what about you?
I'm a total pantser, but like sometimes I try really hard to be a plotter. So like I'll sit down and make these elaborate outlines and be like, this is great. And then I'll start writing and I'll just like not use any of it.
Yeah.
I'll just like go off in a totally different direction. And so then I kind of have to like figure out the plot as I'm writing. Like, so I kind of like do, not really both, but like in the middle of drafting, I'll like make a new outline or make an outline of like just the next few chapters, or like here's the next big plot point that I need to get to somehow. But like I really don't figure out the plot structure until probably I've written the whole draft. Like maybe even a couple versions, you know, a couple revisions.
So I have a question.
Yeah, I'm definitely the same.
Do you feel like, because I know that I say this, like for me, even though I'm so much more naturally a pantser than a plotter for sure, so I've tried, like you say, Sarah, to kind of externally impose that, like a little bit of plotting. I have discovered though that like if I do the upfront work of plotting, then when I sit down to write, it goes more quickly because I have already a sense of what each scene is basically going to be about, or if not what each scene is going to be about, like what each major plot point is, so what I need to do to kind of get there. And, you know, for me, like there was a big gap between my first and second book. And part of it was because I wrote something in the middle that just like wandered all over the place and like didn't hold together. The ideas were good, but it just was like a hot mess. But part of it was just because of the way that I write and the way that I figure stuff out. And so, you know, I've always kind of wanted to be able to hit that sort of book a year goal that I have for myself, not be one of those people who is able to churn out a book every 3 months, because that is so not me. And I feel like it's crazy pressure to put on oneself if that's not how one functions or writes, you know, because we're all so different. But I have found that it does enable me to write more quickly if I have a bit of an outline beforehand. So I wondered if like any of you feel that same way, that if it takes you a little bit longer to write stuff because you're figuring it out as you go.
Yeah, though, like Sarah, when I do try an outline, I tend to be like, well, JK, I'm gonna go this way now. So I struggle with it ultimately being productive. I think when it, like Madeline said, when you've done enough drafts and you kind of like, here's generally what I want to do, and then you do the outline, for me, then it makes it more productive and efficient because I have enough of a grounding on what I care about. But with that first draft, I just don't really, I can't quite know super what I care about until I write and see what I care about. So I might think I know what I care about and I'll outline, and it just, I think I've been betrayed by that process consistently, as much as I want to be able to do it better. So I'm trying to use a little bit more Save the Cat and try and identify some things I care about, but I am struggling with getting into those drafts because it just kind of steals that. I guess writing for me and drafting for me is a process of self-discovery. It's where I'm like, what do I need to learn? What is God trying to teach me right now? And through the act of writing, I learn something. Through the act I'm taught. So if I have that outline already, I kind of like miss the lesson because I guess I have to work through it. I have to do that inefficient process to learn just because I'm stubborn and obnoxious like that. So I think if you can do that, that's phenomenal. And I'm jealous. But for me, I struggle with using an outline effectively at the very beginning stages.
Yeah, it's funny. You guys are talking about like Save the Cat and beat sheets. I used to teach screenwriting for Southern New Hampshire University Online, and I taught we used the beat sheets. We used plotting, and I found when I was writing like a screenplay, I would be able to plot a lot better. I don't really know why that is, but. Yeah, I feel like with a screenplay, I don't really know, because I mean, it's not like the plot structure is more important in a screenplay than fiction. It's just, I guess it's just the way that I get to the plot is different. Because like when I sit down and write a screenplay, it's like I can see the plot more than, you know, I'm really good at figuring out like the process of plotting, but then when I sit down to write like a novel, I just feel like, okay, well, that's a really great plot, but like I don't want to do it. Yeah. So it like becomes something else. Like I guess there's more of like an evolution process with fiction than with screenwriting for me, which is weird, but.
Yeah, definitely. Like I found with my writing, because like I kind of have to write a really messy first draft where I have no idea what is actually going on, because the times like when I have outlined, like hoping that it will save me loads of time, like because otherwise like I end up like editing these manuscripts for like so long, and I'm just like, but there should be a more efficient way to do this. But when I have like done an outline up front before I've even started drafting, I felt in a way that I've already written the story and I'm just not motivated to actually write it again. And because for me, like my favorite part of writing is just like being creative, discovering the characters, discovering what's going to happen. and like it's entertaining myself as well and keeping me interested in it. And like if I'm just following an outline that I've already written, like I know what's going to happen, I know who the bad guy is, and it's not as exciting for me, and I just don't have the motivation to do it. So yeah, like I have to kind of like stick to like my longer way of just like writing a really messy first draft and then spending months and months or sometimes years like reworking it until it's like actually readable. Because like although it's like such a time consuming process, I know that that's the way that I work as a writer, and trying to do it a different way just doesn't work for me, because like I have tried it and I've ended up with like maybe a couple chapters written before I just lost interest. And like even if it's an idea that I'm really excited about, I just can't write it once I've written an outline. So yeah, I now don't allow myself to write an outline until I've finished like a first draft where I've got sort of like all the excitement already out onto the paper. And then at that point, when I'm sort of like switching into like editorial mode and like revising, I can then sort of like create my outline at that point to work out what I want to do with what I've already written.
That makes total sense to me, because when I first started writing, I would do kind of what you said before, Madeline, where I would just write the scenes that interested me in no particular order, not in chronological order. I was so afraid that I would get bored with the story that I just literally wrote the scenes that I loved, and they tended to be the high conflict scenes, or like the pivotal scenes, or the scenes where something really interesting in my mind anyway, happened to my characters. And sitting down and writing from point A to point Z seemed like an impossibility. Like there was no way for me to be able to do it. And, but it was a messy process. You're absolutely right, because then I wound up with this first draft that was probably, 20 to 30 to 40,000 words longer than it needed to be. But I couldn't imagine writing it any other way. And then when I wrote my second book, I wrote like the present day stuff like that, but the stuff that was set in Barbados years and years ago, I felt like I had to write it chronologically because it was historical fiction, so I did already know what happened. And so that was really weird, because I was writing 50% of it the way I normally write stuff, like just the stuff that inspires me in no particular order, stitching it together. And then half of it like A plus B plus C plus D. So that was a weird thing. And then with this, like the dystopian novel, like when I initially wrote it, it underwent so many metamorphoses that by the time I got to the end of it, I was like, okay, this is not at all what I started out with in any way, but I think it's better. But oh my gosh, how did I get from where my first was to this point? So yeah, I don't know. I'm learning a lot from like writing a series. Like I feel like that's really different for me too, because it's requiring me to be more of a plotter than I would normally be. And so I don't know, maybe it's good for me, but part of me is like, oh my gosh, let me out so I can go back to like my crazy patchwork way of writing.
Yeah, like describing it as a patchwork way of writing, that's exactly what I do. Like with my first drafts, I just write the stuff that like really interests me, and like I write sort of like one subplot at a time, building up to like write. Well, I guess like the main plot I think about kind of like as a subplot as well in this way. It's just to be a very big subplot. Like that's how sort of like I think of it. So yeah, like I often find that when I'm sort of like stitching all the pieces together to make like an actual sort of like readable draft, that I do end up with like a lot of different scenes that like I just need to sort of like decide where they go in the story. And like even like my third and fourth draft, I'm still like playing around with the structure, and it causes so many continuity errors, which is like things happening like before other characters know they've happened, and then I'll get to the end and I'll have like a character who doesn't know that something else has happened when they should have. And then but yeah, it's just like it's really messy, but it's a really fun way for me to write. So yeah, should we talk about like advice that we have for writers who want to write YA speculative fiction next?
Sure. Well, I have like a good piece of advice that I think really helps me, because I was in the middle of writing something. I think it was a play, and I was just really like, doubting myself like you do. And I texted my playwright friend, Tommy, and I was like, when you're writing, do you ever just feel like, is this really dumb? And he said, well, yeah, all the time. And I was like, what do you do? And he goes, you just have to write through the dumb. So I feel like that's really good for especially speculative fiction, because you're writing these different worlds, you're writing these different rules, different like things that could never actually happen in reality are happening. And so there's definitely going to be times when you're doubting the story, when you think like, oh, is this really stupid? I mean, is everyone just going to think this is dumb? But like, you just have to press on and like get through that. And because, once you have a draft, you can revise and kind of make it more cohesive. But yeah, I think right through the dumb, that's like, that's something I still use to this day.
I love that. Yeah. So, yeah, Meg, we just.
I mean, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying to Meg, we're just talking about pieces of advice that we have for others who want to write YA speculative. So, yeah, Emily, you can resume.
I was going to say, I mean, for me, I think that I tend to have one or two people who are really good sounding boards, and I think that is extremely helpful to me, especially with speculative and world building, because no one can tell you how to write your story for sure, but people can tell you, people who read the sort of thing that you want to write, which I think is also really important. Like, I have friends who are amazing, wonderful readers, but what they read is literary fiction, which is not at all what I write. So if I were to try, and they don't read speculative and they don't read fantasy, so if I were to try to talk to them about my world building or about problems that I'm having with the plot or whatever, their advice would not be as valuable to me as someone for whom this is what they read all the time. So I tend to find, people in my life who are really great sounding boards when I'm writing, where I can be like, you know what, I put this together, like, without getting into all the nitty gritty details of the plot. Can I just explain this to you, and you tell me if this makes sense to you or if there's holes, or have you read anything like this before, because this sounds really familiar to me and I don't want to copy anybody else's work, or so for me, I think getting to that point where the idea isn't so fragile that you're afraid to share it because it'll burst like a soap bubble and you'll have nothing left whatsoever. But also being at the place where maybe you're a little bit stuck and you've gone around in your head so many times and you've done like all of your go-tos of like going for a walk, going outside, listening to music, whatever it is that one might do. That's my thing, is like when you're writing speculative and you're wondering if a world makes sense or a world holds up, finding one or two people in your life that are familiar with your work, that read that type of thing, that you can run it by, and that will tell you honestly, like, oh my God, that is such crap, that makes no sense, huh? Or, wow, that's amazing. That's so cool. Yeah, go further with this because I'm curious about that. Because sometimes something will be entirely clear to me in my head that just didn't make it onto the page, or something will just seem like a small detail to me that's not that interesting in any way. And if I hear two people seize on that, I'm like, oh, maybe I should expand that. So I think that's important to me, like finding that balance between when it's a private writing process that you just need to keep to yourself, but when it's time to sort of let a couple people in and bounce ideas off of them and see if your world building holds up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And just being able to get someone else's opinion, it's like it's really helpful, because, like, as I was saying earlier, like when I get stuck on like an aspect of world building, it's often just because I'm way too close to it to look at it objectively and work out like what is wrong. And I suppose the same thing like applies when I'm actually drafting as well. And like if I get stuck and like think that I've got like writer's block and I don't know like what's going to happen next, it's usually because I've had a character do something that isn't natural for that character to do, and it's usually a sign that I'm stuck because I'm trying to take the manuscript and the plot in a direction that isn't natural for it. So yeah, like I'm just like really aware of that now, that if I do start to get stuck, then it means that I sort of usually need to delete the last scene I've written and then like start and go back a bit and just start from that as like a new starting point, and then try and take it in a better direction that seems more natural and like more organic for the story that I'm trying to write. But yeah, like my main bit of advice that like I give to people when like they're asking, especially for like way speculative, is just to have fun when you're writing it, because I just think that's like hugely important. Because yeah, like I have to be like entertained when I write, and I have to be having fun. Like even if I'm writing something hugely dark and like disturbing, I'm still having fun when I write it. So yeah, like I just think that enjoying what you're writing is so important, because like if you're not enjoying it and you're seeing like more as a chore, I do think that sort of like comes across in your writing, and that readers will be able to pick up on it. So, yeah, Meg, do you have any bits of advice that you would like to share?
I think persist is the biggest advice. Writing, it doesn't always happen according to our timetables. There's so much out of our control, especially with publishing. I mean, this book that I've written 20 drafts on, in 2016, I would have said, oh, I'm going to have a deal and it's going to get published by 2018, when we make those plans, it just doesn't work, and it can be discouraging. So just persisting, I think, is so critical. To write the best book you can and to not give up on it, even if you don't feel like you're getting the feedback you want. If you care about it, you've got to keep fighting for it.
Well, so, and I think, moving beyond, like, because the original question was like focused on speculative fiction, but, sort of looking at that general advice, I think that what Meg is saying is so important, because, publishing and writing is such a marathon, not a sprint. And I think that I've spoken to some writers that are just starting out where they believe that there's really only one type of success. Like success only looks one way. Success is a deal with the big 5 publisher, and you get a big advance, and stuff is plastered all over the place, and blah 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 blah. And one thing that I've learned is, like, I was published with a big 5 press, and now I'm publishing with a really small press. And I think that there's so much to be said by looking at the advantages and disadvantages of all models, and not all books are right for all models. And there's such incredible flexibility of bringing out a book on your own and having so much control. There's such incredible flexibility to working with a small press, and you're going to get more attention that way, probably. Of course, the flip side of that is that they won't have the same muscle as a traditional publisher. But unless you're a really big name with a traditional publisher, you might be more likely to get reviewed by Publishers Weekly, et cetera, et cetera. But otherwise, you're just going to be one of many units in their stable, so to speak. And so I think that is one big piece of advice that I would really give, and it has nothing to do with speculative fiction, but just a new writer starting out, is just educate yourself about all the different avenues of the publishing process. Find out what it means to be traditionally published with a large press, with a small press, to be indie published, to be self-published. Like, what do all of these mean? What are the trends in the industry right now? Really educate yourself. Like, if you are writing romance, find out what the word count is for romance, and don't write 120,000 word romance. But of course, it's totally different if you're writing fantasy. So I feel like for a lot of new writers starting out, you don't know, of course, what you don't know. And that is the way with everything in life. And so I think the publishing industry right now is in many ways a really wonderful place to be, because there are so many choices, and there's not just one model of what publishing looks like. There's so much freedom in terms of the type of swag that you create for your book, or how you reach out to your audiences, or, it's so much different, but also more complicated, but also simpler than just like walking into a bookstore and having an in-person event. You have the ability to reach audience members all over the world, in a way that you never did before. And so I think that's one big thing that I would say for sure is, like, and don't get discouraged. If you try one model of publishing and it doesn't work, don't give up and be like, oh, it's me, it's crap, I'll never publish anything. But, be like, okay, maybe try with a different story, or let me try a different avenue with this story, and just to never forget about why it is that you're doing this, which goes back to what Madeline was saying, is because it's fun. And if you don't love it, no one else is going to love it either. So those are lessons I have along the way for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with those. And reading as well, like envision about your writing, and I think that's like hugely important. And yeah, I think like maybe we can talk a bit next about like our favorite books, like YA speculative and otherwise as well, because like I know that like if I'm sort of like feeling that I'm a bit stuck with what I'm writing, or if I'm sort of like looking for like a new idea that I'm then going to start working with, I will just read so many different things, because I just find like reading other books like hugely inspiring, and I think it's really important to also know what is currently being written in the genre, what's currently popular. So yeah, like I'm just thinking about the last two speculative YA books that I read, and they were A Song Below Water by Bethany Hugh Morrow and Master of Shadows by Lindsay Miller. And both of those have like amazing world building. And I remember as I was reading them, I was actually like making little notes in a notebook about like why I was just so like drawn into this world. Because one of them is like this sort of like epic fantasy world, and then the other is like magical realism. But they both like felt so real, even though like the sort of like level of fantasy was slightly different and it was like a slightly different approach. And I think just like reading widely and working out like why exactly you like your favorite books and what it is about them that's really appealing to you is so helpful, especially like as a writer, because like reading analytically can really help you improve your own craft. So yeah, what are your favorite like YA speculative books at the moment?
Well, one that I really like, The Astonishing Color of After by Emily Pan. I think it's a great example of a book that establishes its world right away as magic realism, which I think magic realism can be tricky to do, because I know I've read examples where everything was so normal and then suddenly, oh, now there's a fantastical element, and I felt less like surprised and more betrayed because I felt like they had created rules and then they just ditched the rules. So I think she does such a great job of creating that marriage of the magical and the everyday from the very first line. And she has background as a literary writer, and so just the writing is just so rich and beautiful. The speculative element is so rich and beautiful. Like I think it's a really great example of what speculative fiction can do. And well, that's what's so great about speculative fiction. There's so many different ways it can manifest itself. You know, it can be just a little touch of magic in the everyday. It can be dystopian. It could be fantasy. There's so many possibilities, and I think that's what's so great about the genre.
Yeah, I really liked. I mean, it's not like that recent, but I really liked Laini Taylor's Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. I felt like it was very like imaginative and very like almost poetically written, and I really liked like the tone and the feeling that it evoked. Yeah, I'm really big into like feeling and tone more so than plot, I think. You know.
I don't know if anyone of you read Maggie Stiefvater's Raven Boys books, but
I've heard
I love
them,
and I think they're beautifully done. And she recently brought out so they are the Raven cycle is complete, but then she brought out sort of I wouldn't call it a spin-off series. It's related to the Raven Cycle books, but it's its own series. I believe the book is called, I don't have it in front of me, but Call Down the Hawk. And so I read that pretty recently. And one of the big points in that book is that there's a character, one of the main characters, who what he dreams, he can bring to life and it comes back with him from his dreams. And sometimes it's great things and sometimes it's terrifying things. And that's only one part of the plot. But you know, I feel like Maggie Stiefvater is also a visual artist, I believe. And so you can totally see that in the way that she writes. It's very, very visual. The characters are vibrant. Even the characters that don't always make good choices, I can't help but feel for, because she's painted them so vividly. And she's so original, and her word choices, you know, when you read and you're like, oh my gosh, that is the perfect way to describe that, but I would never have thought about that before. She does that all the time. And so I feel like her writing is beautiful and her characters are so strong that, you know, and her way of looking at the world, she's very original in her approach. You know, I have never picked up one of her books and been like, oh yeah, that's just so much like blah, 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 you know, like I do sometimes. So yeah, I love her work. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, I really need to read her books. My to be read list is just like out of control at the moment, because I just like keep adding more and more books to it. But like, there's just so many amazing books out there. That's the thing. So, yeah, is there anything else that any of you would like to say before we sort of like wrap up?
Thanks for having me and enabling me to connect with such amazing writers. I just feel like stuff like this is such a great opportunity just to hear from and learn from other people that you might not otherwise connect with. So I'm just always I'm so excited and to have that opportunity. And Sara and Meg, I just really loved hearing what motivates you and what drives you for sure.
Well said. Yes, echoing Emily's thought. Thank you for making this happen. This was really great.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was really nice to connect with all of you and hear about your process.
Yeah, it's always so interesting and like fascinating talking to other writers. So yeah, thank you all of you for joining me. So it's been a really great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.